I know what you're thinking. Michael, who are Lewis and Clark, and why am I watching? Look, okay, this is just my history homework. Please don't ruin my audience attention. Please. Lewis and Clark were two mates who explored the new bit of America, Louisiana, that big man Thomas Jefferson just bought from France. And this is another question that I asked myself. Why did America have to buy America? We'll get to that, don't worry. Firstly, a brief history about Lewis and Clark. Big man Lewis stopped something called the Whiskey Rebellion, and he graduated college and became Thomas's secretary. What a simp. And big man Clark became a lieutenant, and that's just how they met, by shooting and stabbing things together in the army. You know, the purest form of love. Remember back a couple seconds in the video when I said about America buying America, and well, now it's time to talk about that. According to the website where I'm getting all my data from, France and India were having a war, or as the roadmen say, a scrap. And because of this war, France had to give Spain most of Louisiana. And why did France have it in the first place? I don't really know. The website didn't say it. We'll just brush past it. The rest of Louisiana was given to Britain, though. And during this time, America was like, yeah, whatever. Big chillin'. You know, doesn't affect them until some chap called Napoleon came along, who I think owned France. I think. It was like, hey Spain, could I possibly get that land back, please? And Spain was like, yeah, sure, dog. And it was all well until Napoleon was like, yo, America can't go through this land anymore. Kind of a jerk move. And then America was all sad about it, you know, because, you know, you gotta kind of eat and trade through there. It's just a bit important, isn't it? And then a year later, Thomas Jefferson was like, hey, have $15 million. Can I get a Louisiana? And Napoleon was like, sure, man. And while that all happened, Jefferson pulled a sneaky one and was like, hey, Lewis, wouldn't it be funny if you just kind of went and explored that land that I technically haven't bought yet from France? So Lewis found Clark and they set off to Louisiana. Originally, when Thomas gave the big man Lewis the command to start to prepare, he had no one, not a soul, nada, nothing, zilch. And then he was like, yo, big man Clark, wanna travel 8,000 miles across America with me? And Clark was like, sure. And from there, they immediately got to planning. They split all responsibilities, even though Lewis was kind of technically in charge. And then they got work planning for the trek ahead of them. They found 40 other people to join them. They learnt botany, astronomy, zoology, and tons of other things. They also looked at a bunch of maps, and even made a special type of boat for it. And on the trip, they bought compasses, telescopes, camping supplies, soap, clothing, fishing equipment, weapons and ammo, medicine, books, maps, and they also got some presents for the Indians, which is quite nice of them. They don't even know them, such as beads, face paint, knives, tobacco, combs, cloth, ribbons, and mirrors. Clark and his 45 crewmates would start to move. They would travel around 15 miles a day upstream in the Missouri River, fighting heat, insects, and strong river. If their crew was naughty, Lewis and Clark would be really hard on them, giving them bad punishments. But surprisingly this worked, because there was only one casualty the entire journey, 22-year-old Sergeant Charles Floyd. When travelling across America, most of the land they explored was already taken up by native tribes. They encountered at least 50 different tribes, such as the Sioux, Mandan, and Blackfeet. Lewis and Clark had a protocol in place when meeting a tribe. They would firstly give their leader a fancy coin with big man Thomas Jefferson on one side, and on the other side the words peace and love. They would next talk to the Indians. This is how their conversation would go. Hey, native, have a coin. Yeah. Also, I just want to tell you, the land that you're on right now, the bit you live off of, yeah, that's ours. But, yeah, no, don't be like, it's okay, because if you're peaceful and nice, we will protect you with our military. They're so weird, oh my god. Most of the Indian tribes they encountered were actually quite nice and peaceful, but some of the Indian tribes they met was actually openly hostile and reluctant to trust Lewis and Clark. One of the main unfriendly tribes were the Teton Sioux, who tried to stop their boat and demanded for payment, but luckily Lewis and Clark managed to defeat them and get through. In the trip, they set up a very large fort called Fort Mandan. They lived there for about 5 months or so, and in that time, Clark prepared maps and the team would hunt, forage, make new supplies and weapons and clothes there. While at Fort Mandan, Lewis and Clark met a woman named Sacagawea, who they hired to help them on the rest of their journey across America. Sacagawea was kidnapped by Indians when she was 12, then sold to other Indians. Lewis and Clark had hired her in hopes that she might be able to help communicate with other Indians they might meet on their journey. On February of 1805, Sacagawea gave birth to a child and then became really important to Lewis and Clark. And then eventually, during the last but a more difficult part of their journey, Sacagawea was reunited with her brother, who she hadn't seen when they were kidnapped. On April 7th, 1805, Lewis and Clark sent some of their crew home with zoological and botanical samplings, maps, reports, and letters. The rest of the crew headed for the Pacific. They crossed through Montana and made their way to the Continental Divide. Now, crossing the Continental Divide was the hardest part of the journey. The team suffered from frostbite, dehydration, bad weather, and freezing temperatures, and were exhausted. But after all of that, they finally reached the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. Now that they had finished the mission, they set up Fort Catslop for the winter, and this was not an easy winter for the team. Everyone struggled to keep their supplies dry and fought a battle with fleas and other insects, and almost everyone was weak and sick due to stomach problems, which was most likely caused by hunger and bacterial infections. On March 23rd, 1806, they left their final fort, Fort Catslop, and made their way home. The two groups split up for a bit. Lewis's group took a shortcut, meanwhile Clark's group, including Sacagawea and her family, went up south along the Yellowstone River. The two groups planned on meeting back in North Dakota, and there they lived happily ever after.